Before I start, can I just say, in the co-educational world, we prefer to be called head teachers rather than headmasters. That's one that marks us out from schools which tend to be single-sex boys by and large. Just to introduce myself, my current job is head teacher at Sir Henry Floyd Grammar School, which is a mixed co-educational grammar school in the middle of Aylesbury. Previous to that, I've taught in 4 or 5 schools, one which was a boys' grammar school. Roy Page spoke earlier on. He and I started our career at similar times, a long time ago now. I've worked in, say, boys' schools, I've worked in mixed schools, and recently, until I took up my current post, I was head of school improvement for a London borough, and that borough had 2 single-sex comprehensive schools in it as well. So I've seen both sides of the fence. My children, one went to mixed school, one went to a single-sex school. So as a parent too, I've seen the full range of things that schools have to offer. And as I put together this talk with the title I was given, The Benefits of Co-Education, I've been reflecting, it's a bit like asking me to talk on the benefits of healthy eating. I mean, why would anyone want to do differently? From my background and my perspective, it just seems an instinctive thing to want to educate children side by side in the way they've been educated by and large side by side from the age of 5 onwards. And also, like a topic like healthy eating, sometimes to define what you're talking about, you have to look at the other side as well. So a fair bit of what I say will be comparing and contrasting the 2 sorts of schools. So I won't limit myself just to specifically talking about the benefits of my kind of school. It'll be done in comparison to other kinds of schools as well. And I think before we get started, we need to be clear in our mind just what it is that schools are for. And I just came up with one sort of punchline which guides most of my work. That's to help parents in their job of making their children turn into successful adults. It's a big challenge we give ourselves by having something as broad as that, but I think most of us operate with that kind of philosophy underpinning what we do. And I think that's probably got 3 separate dimensions to it. One is the kind of academic dimension. Our role there is to help parents make sure that children end up as well qualified with as good a range of educational opportunities behind them as they can for the first step of their adult life. Another dimension is the social dimension. Both parents and schools together work on their children's social development, helping them to gain confidence, helping them relate to other people, helping them develop leadership skills, and helping them understand their own social instincts as well. And I guess probably if the academic part of it was a job which schools do mainly with parents taking a slightly less important role, I guess the social education is something probably 50-50. But actually when you think that for most children, their school life is a much richer and fuller social environment than even the most socially aware parents can produce at home, just because of the scale of the thing. Probably for the social education, schools probably do the majority of it, but not quite as much as they do for the academics. And then perhaps the third dimension might be the spiritual dimension. Schools and parents together are keen to do what they can to make sure that children understand what's right and what's wrong, the consequences of good behaviour, and how to make sure you conduct yourself in a way that the community you live in has a kind of moral fibre to it somewhere. And I guess for that third dimension, parents probably have a bigger influence than schools do, but nonetheless, we do care about that as well. So, ideas about what being a successful adult actually means have varied through time, and they vary across cultures. It wasn't very long ago that our society's expectation was that men and women would take very different roles. And up until 150 years ago, girls didn't go to school. The only schools there were boys' school, because at that time it was felt that the role that women needed to adopt in adult life didn't need an education. Some of the richer ones had a governess at home to help them, but the concept of a school was invented for boys, and it was only, I think, about the 1800s that girls actually had the right to have any kind of education. So by the end of the 19th century, we got to a place where girls got the right to be educated, but initially in that culture, the role of men and women in adult life was really quite different. So it's a very fair assumption then to think that since their adult role was going to be different, their educational experience to lead up to that should be quite different and distinct. These days, our ambitions are for women and men to have completely equal opportunities. So the question people like me and parents like yourselves have to ask is, well, what is the best school environment to support an adult world where men and women compete, play on absolutely equal terms? There are some that do feel that odds are still stacked against women in the workplace, and they may feel that until we are completely equal in our workplace opportunities, there still is a need for girls to be nurtured and hothoused in a particular way that gives them a skill set to cope with male competition in adult life, but that needs until they're adults to actually take them to one side and deal with them separately. So it may well have been true a generation ago that boys and girls needed to be treated separately because successful adulthood was different for both of them. But I question whether that's true or not anymore. I certainly doubt it. Actually, earlier this year, I had the privilege of visiting some schools in the United Arab Emirates. I went to Abu Dhabi for a week, and I visited 4 or 5 schools there. Now, in Abu Dhabi, the culture is very different to ours, and the expectations of the roles that men and women take are very different to our expectations. And fascinating there, most of the schools were single-sex schools. I saw some boys' schools, some girls' schools, and one mixed school. The mixed school there, co-educational school, was a private school, whereas some of the other schools were state schools. And fascinatingly, actually, in that culture, the mixed school was the one where the parents with professional aspirations wanted their children to go to. And that school had a very different feel to all the others that I saw. Some of the girls didn't even have their hair covered, never mind the full face cover, because their parents appreciated in the world in which they wanted their daughters to compete, it was less appropriate for them to be so distinctively dressed as perhaps in some other occupation in that particular culture. Went to one girls' school, which left me with an experience which I can still feel the emotional impact of several months later, where I was walking around the school and just put my head through the glass panel in the classroom door to watch a lesson happening. And there was a shriek of terror greeted me as my male face appeared in the window of the classroom, because the girls hadn't got their faces covered. There was no girly cheerfulness about it at all. It was a noise of panic that still chills me as they grabbed their face masks and pulled them across there. Very different culture to ours, and very appropriate for men and women to get treated differently. But interestingly there, the most rigorously single-sex schools with the most pronounced differences in how girls and boys behaved were the ones from the non-professional classes, the ones to educate Bedouin children in particular, who had agricultural aspirations rather than professional aspirations. Quite different to our take on it in England, where most of our single-sex schools tend to be for the professionally affluent parent group, if you like, rather than the opposite as it was in Abu Dhabi. So, the main issues then that we're looking at. The claims for co-education are that children end up being better emotionally developed, probably happier, and have a smoother transition to university and then proper adult life. And I skipped over 2 slides at once there. I'm not sure I can get back. Sorry. Boom. That's right. The claims for single-sex schools are that boys and girls both tend to do better academically in single-sex schools, and that both sexes together means that sometimes girls are put off doing boy-friendly subjects and boys are put off doing girl-friendly subjects. Those are the claims, but actually serious academic evidence to support those claims is very, very limited in either case. Fairly recently, in 2005 was the last time I looked, 9 of the top performing independent schools were girls' schools, and 5 of the top 10 state schools were also girls' schools. The other 5 had 3 boys and 2 mixed among them. So it can't be denied that our country's most successful schools in terms of examination results do tend to be single-sex. But it's a big step to say they are as good as they are because they're single-sex. It's certainly a strong feature of British education that the end examination results that children get are determined very, very largely by their academic ability when they start the school and by the social background they come from. And it tends to be the case in Britain that single-sex schools do recruit almost exclusively from very bright children from very privileged background, just how it is from us. So actually it would be a scandal if their examination results weren't among the very best in the country. So academic research into whether one particular boy might do better in a single-sex environment or a mixed environment is just about non-existent. In education, we tend not to do double-blind trials like we do perhaps for drug testing. When you're testing a drug, you can give someone a placebo and somebody a real drug. They don't know which to get until they've finished, and you see which drug actually has an impact. We don't do that in education. So most of what we say either has to look kind of bulks of schools together and make some guesses, or it's just collecting a series of myths that our culture seems to develop as the years go by. There have been thousands of research papers written about this particular topic, some of it paid for by special interest groups. In Britain, the Girls' Schools Association are very prolific in the research market, and there's an American equivalent for co-education, the American Council for Co-Educational Schooling. So they're obviously very biased in the direction of co-education. But there is some neutral work that has gone on. 2 particular studies I've been reading in preparation for this talk. One was done by an outfit called the National Foundation for Educational Research as part of a very large study they did about impact of secondary education on children's development. And another piece of work conducted by Alan Smithers and Pam Robinson, who was commissioned to do some work on single-sex and mixed education by the Headmasters and Mistresses Conference. So quite a neutral body representing head teachers of all sorts of schools commissioned a major piece of work looking at what evidence there was for single-sex or mixed education. So exam result-wise, the NFER study said that girls in single-sex comprehensives did do slightly better at GCSE than girls in mixed comprehensives, with the difference showing mostly at the lower points of the ability range. Significant feature there. For comprehensive boys, there was no difference at all between those in single sex and those in mixed schools. Boys in grammar schools and single sex schools did slightly better than boys in mixed grammars. And in the girls' performance, there was no difference at all for the girls in grammar schools, whether they went to a single sex grammar school or a mixed grammar school. A massive educational study came up with very little at all. And actually, as a study, it has some important flaws. It took no account at all of socio-economic background of any of those groups or their ethnic origin, and both those have significant impacts on final results. There was a big American study done mainly in Catholic schools by a chap called Reardon, and he concluded that the consequences of attending one type of school or the other are typically insignificant for middle class or otherwise advantaged students. They again did find some slight benefits for children from disadvantaged backgrounds who went to single-sex schools rather than mixed schools. Again, but in their context, it turned out to be the case that the children from the socially disadvantaged backgrounds that went to single-sex schools had parents who made a conscious choice to do something against the norm, as it were, because the norm in America is very much mixed schools. And so the fact parental support was so much stronger may well have explained that finding. Alan Smithers concluded that separating the sexes, get the slide coming up, is not a recipe for raising academic performance. So on academic performance alone, the evidence is very neutral. It doesn't say co-education is better, but doesn't say single sex is better either. So let's think about subject choices. Some people do like to think that girls' and boys' brains are wired differently. May or may not be true. I think I disagree partly with that particular feature. But a lot of people do feel that girls in an all-girl environment are more likely to take subjects where boys might provide fierce competition in a mixed environment, the sciences in particular. And it certainly is a fact across our country that girls do tend to do better at English and languages, and that boys tend to do better at maths and science, although the gaps are actually narrowing. When it comes to how many girls take up the typical boy subjects in girls or mixed schools and how many boys take up typical girl-friendly subjects, it's difficult to know what the goal should be. Should we expect a 50-50 take-up? Should we look at some girls' schools and see whether the ratio of subjects they choose is different to boys' schools? It's a thing which is very, very difficult to measure. Interesting, actually, across the world, it's another feature. Across the world, in the countries that take part in the OECD PISA study, which sets tests to children in about 40 different countries, in all 40 countries in the PISA test, the girls do better at reading tests than the boys do. And in 38 out of 40 countries that do the PISA mathematics test, the boys do better in mathematics than the girls. But in the case of UK, only very, very slightly so. In maths, it's just about equal there. Just anecdotal evidence in my own school, if I might want just to collect the evidence that I can see. One local mixed school, which happens to be mine, I discovered just last week that 72% of our Year 12 students, that's the first year of the sixth form, have chosen to do mathematics or at least one science subject. I've no idea how that compares. Others may tell you that, but in my particular school, nearly 3/4 of girls in a mixed environment have chosen A-level to do maths or a science. One little graph I skittered over there. This is a graph of the number of girls taking A-level physics and the number of girls who go to single-sex girls' schools. And you see from 1960 through to 2005, the number of girls' schools has declined dramatically. Comprehensivization kind of started about here, which makes most of that happen. This is the percentage of girls who take physics A-level. And you see, as the number of girls' schools has declined, the number of girls taking physics has actually increased. So there's certainly no direct correlation there about impact on girls' choices to do A-level subjects. So pressing on then perhaps to look at emotional development and happiness. I think if we've managed to look at the evidence and see that in terms of subject choices and academic performance, there's very little to choose between two sorts of schools. Let's look at these claims of schools like myself, co-educational schools, that there's something about personal development, personal fulfillment and happiness that is more prevalent in a mixed environment than in a single-sex environment. There have been lots of psychological studies looking at things like the impact on children's self-esteem and self-image to be in a single-sex school or a mixed school, but again, that's been completely inconclusive. One other piece of research it might be worth to look at, there may be some measure of happiness. This was a piece of work done by Smithers and Robinson, who asked girls and boys who've been to single-sex schools or mixed schools what kind of school they want their own children to go to. And for once, we've finally got some evidence that looks as though there are some numbers that are telling us something. This is girls who went to a single-sex school themselves, and of the girls who went to single-sex school, 38% would want their own daughter to go to a single-sex school, and 20% would prefer their own daughter to go to a mixed school, and 42% had no preference. The girls who had gone to a co-ed school, none of them wanted to choose single sex for their daughters. Almost all wanted their daughters to go to a mixed school. Now that may be some reflection of those mothers' experience of their own school days, so that may be telling us something about the happiness of their own experience at school. Similar picture for boys. Boys that went to a boys-only school, just under a third wanted their boys to go single sex, just under a third wanted their boys to go co-ed, 40 had no preference. Of the boys that went to a mixed school, practically none wanted their own boys to have the same experience, and a huge majority would rather their own boys went to a mixed school for their secondary education. That's fairly recent. I think 1997 that work was done in the United Kingdom by Professor Smithers. So that's probably the closest I've come in my research to finding some numbers that mean very much at all. One other research project was looking at how easily children found it to settle at university depending on their school background. There are some numbers here which look as though they might be saying something, but statisticians tell me that actually they're not statistically significant. But I'll go through that again. Girls who've been to single-sex school, this is the percentage that said they found it difficult to adjust to university, either academically or socially. Girls who went to single-sex school, 42% said it's difficult to adjust academically, 31% socially. Girls that went co-ed, still nearly 40% found it difficult academically, and a slightly smaller number had difficulty adjusting socially. So some very weak evidence to the fact that girls may find university easier socially if they went to a mixed environment. Of the boys who went to a single-sex school, 44% found it hard to make a transition, the same as boys going to co-ed school, just about. And the number of boys that had problems adjusting socially, much the same between the two. There are numbers there that show a difference in favour of co-ed, but the statisticians say they're not statistically significant, so don't get too excited about those. Okay, so it looks as though education research doesn't really help us very much in trying to answer the question either about academic outputs, about subject choices, about emotional happiness, or about transition to adult life. All the research is totally mixed. So I think we're down to common sense now. So my common sense take on it is that education is about preparing young people to be successful adults. And for those who are not called to be monks or nuns, that's most of us, the adult world is a mixed environment. If schools are to help prepare young people for a workplace where they manage other people, work under other managers, make things happen working in teams with a wide range of people, then it seems to me to make obvious sense that their school environment should be one in which they gain practice there. If there are issues about women's confidence in the workplace, where better to start learning how to boss boys around than in their schools before they get to be in the workplace. If school is really about helping young people relate to others, then a mixed environment must give a fuller experience to that variety of relationships. And if schooling really is about getting young people to appreciate that not everyone's just like them, then a mixed environment must surely be a healthier place for that to actually happen. Give you a tiny anecdote, which I'll probably be embarrassed to see on the YouTube when it actually gets put up. We had a boy who joined my own school fairly recently, came into year 11 quite late, from another part of the country, not another local school. And in his first week in school, he was in trouble because he leant over his desk and once or twice pinged the brass trap of the girl in front of him through her blouse. And we'd never ever had anything like that happen at school at all before. So we asked ourselves, what on earth's going on? Why is this boy behaving in a way that our boys wouldn't dream of behaving? And someone asked the question, was his last school a single-sex school? And it was. So that particular boy had found being with girls an unsettling experience because it was fresh for him at whatever time it happened. And we do find, again, looking around the school, with the myths you hear about co-ed schools, that boys spend all the time showing off to girls, just doesn't seem to hold true. I've taught in a boys' school, and boys show off to boys just as much as boys show off to girls. No difference there at all. We don't find every other couple in a passionate clinch every time we go around the playground at lunchtime. We have hardly any clinching couples at all. And very often you see outside single-sex schools final farewells as various couples linger before they go their own sweet way. It doesn't happen for us. We've got never more than 3 or 4 hand-holdings going on any particular lunchtime because boys and girls aren't strange creatures. Girls are people who copy homework off and boys are people who watch playing football. That's just normal life for them, kids at our place. So I guess if young people are going to develop all the social skills that we want them to, then I reckon without much research evidence that an environment that properly reflects their future may well be a healthier place to do it. Alan Smithers, when he finished years of work, came up with that fantastic erudite conclusion that actually The beliefs are so strong about single-sex or mixed education, but the evidence is so weak. The more you read, the more confusing it gets. At the end of the day, choosing a good school against a non-good school, choosing a school you think suits your child is just the key thing. And you're lucky, certainly in this part of the world, with a fantastic range of schools in the state sector and the independent sector to choose from. So if you're worried about academic research telling you that one sort's better than the other and you better find what it is and panic to make sure you get it right, the research will tell you nothing. Follow your instincts, what you think will suit your children. Thank you.